Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name's Kate if you're new, and this is one of my favorite videos that I make every year, usually somewhere in January. It is my top 5 books of the year video of 2021 in this case. I didn't read that many books this year compared to pre-COVID years, but I was about bang on track for COVID years. So this is not going to be the video where I talk about everything that I read in the year. That will be more videos down the line. Hopefully I do go back to work tomorrow. So we'll see what I can do when I'm also doing speech and language therapy for about 50-something elementary school kids a week. It's a lot. Especially since I'm going in as like a long-term sub for a maternity leave, so I really had to just hit the ground running. And this is my first real job outside of grad school, and there's a lot of like case management stuff that I'm learning. Anyway, you all don't care about that. Let's get into my favorite books slash favorite series that I read this year, because I completed some series, as we will see. So the first series that I want to talk about that I finished this year, this was on my fantasy series goals for the year, so I guess a sneak peek at what that video is going to be like. But it is the Dominion of the Fallen series by Aliette de Bedard. I think of them as the House of Blank books because they are the House of Shattered Wings, the House of Binding Thorns, and then the House of Sundering Flame is the final book, which I just recently finished this month. It is such a fucking good series. I have talked about this series before on my channel, but I still don't feel like enough people are reading it. It is super queer. It is about, essentially there were a bunch of like indigenous kind of spirits and minor gods and things like that. And then angels fell to the earth, and in a big old colonialism metaphor, they kind of took over. And then, because again, colonialism metaphor, they basically set off World War III and destroyed most of the planet. So the setting for this one is a post-Angel War, war-torn Paris. And it is a very interesting mix of, like, you know, Christian mythology with the fallen angels, and Lucifer Morningstar is like a character in this series, as is Asmodeus. There are a lot of pulls from sort of biblical mythology, but then also she mixes in a lot of Vietnamese mythology, as she herself is mix of French and Vietnamese. As I said, again, these books are super queer. The angels seem to be mostly queer, but there are like angel-human relationships that are sapphic, and the male version of that, I don't have a good word. There's just a whole big variety. There's a trans character in here. There's just a lot to love. So these books have kind of mystery aspects to them. They also have a lot of like political rivalry, because in the wake of the Great Angel War, they set up these houses. So there's a lot more like political maneuvering and backstabbing versus outright war, which tore the city apart. So yeah, there's often like a mystery aspect to it, a sort of court intrigue aspect to it. There's a whole big host of characters. I did end up reading these kind of spread apart, so it was sometimes difficult for me to keep all of the characters apart in my head. Like there would be a character that would maybe get, I would think, introduced in this book, and then something would come up about them and I would have to remember them. Oh, right, they actually were introduced in an earlier book and I just forgot. But I love this series so much, and no one is reading it and no one's talking about it, and I need people to read this series. It's so good. Next on the list is another trilogy that was also on my 2021 fantasy series goal for the year. It was the Collegia Magica series by Berg. I hesitate to show you the covers because they're not good. But she gets done so dirty by her covers so often, and it makes me so sad. But they are the Spirit Lens, the Soul Mirror, and the Demon Prism. Like I said, they're not great. The Soul Mirror is kind of the best one, so I'll stick with this one for now. What Berg does really, really well is that she'll take a like real historical setting and then kind of file the serial numbers off it and work in a really cool magic system. That's kind of her brand. So this series is her like Renaissance Italy series, although I think she's writing another series now under a different pen name that's also kind of Renaissance Italy, but this one is very like Age of Enlightenment, where like science and reason are kind of taking over from the world of magic, because it turns out that a lot of so-called magicians have been doing a lot of parlor tricks and kind of getting away with not really doing real magic. So there is real magic in the world, but people are kind of starting to believe that there isn't, because a lot of people have been like being underhanded about it. Anyway, the series starts when the librarian of the magical university, who was a student of magic before he essentially discovered that he had no real magical talent despite coming from a magical family, and so instead of being kicked out of the university, he became the librarian. He is approached by the king and told that there was a magical assassination attempt on the king, and it failed, but, obviously, but they need to know more about it, especially with this magical nature. So the king has come to his distant cousin, who is the librarian, because who better to investigate your magical murder than someone who knows all about magic but can't actually do it. He does also partner him with a mage who is kind of outside of the court of mages, because again, magical murder, one of them might have been involved. And this is the extremely grouchy mage Dante, yes, his name is literally Dante, who kind of came out of nowhere, was not from a magical family, had this amazing magical talent, and then got like certified essentially by the university and then fucked off. So he's partnered with Dante and then also the queen's like adopted brother, or I think maybe they're half siblings, I can't remember, who is this like fop. There's a little bit more to him than meets the eye. I love him so much. So, shut up. My cat thinks it's dinner time. It's not. It's like not even 4 o'clock. But if you hear his cries, that's what he's whining about. He thinks he is starving to death. So, this series, I tried to read it physically over and over and over again, and I kept stalling out in the beginning, because sort of the one flaw of this series is it does have a slow start. And the first book is also narrated entirely from the point of view of the librarian character. And then the second book is narrated entirely by a fairly minor character in book one, but she is pulled into the sort of web of assassination attempts sort of against her will. And then the third book has some split point of view stuff going on, but it is primarily narrated by Dante, the aforementioned grouchy mage. And so I started it physical copy, couldn't get through it over and over again, and then I switched to audiobook, and that did it for my brain. I was able to get past the beginning, and then as soon as I got like more into the meat of the story, I was like, oh shit, I'm hooked. And then I devoured this entire trilogy, which is not super short, but I ran through them in like a month. And a lot of times if there's an entire trilogy, I won't really read them like back to back to back, because I want to just have like a tonal break and just read something else. But this series, once I got past that beginning, I finished the entire trilogy without a break. Like I went straight to the next one and then straight to the next one. The problem, however, is that their narrator for Dante in book 3 is not correct. Especially because you've been hearing him narrated by other people for 2 books. And then they got a guy who does not sound at all like how he's been narrated for the other 2 books. So annoyingly, I would say listen to the audiobooks of the first 2 and then read the physical book for the third one, but no one's going to want to do that. So I don't know. I don't know your life. Figure it out. However, the end result is that you should absolutely read this series. I hope I've given you enough information that this sounds intriguing, despite the bad covers, despite the weirdness with the audiobooks. I adore this series. I rated the first one, I think 4 stars because of the, again, slow start, but then I rated the second 2 5 stars. Like, they're phenomenal. Okay, so my final series of my top 5 of the year is another trilogy that I'm a little bit ashamed to admit that I read, but also a little bit ashamed to admit that I've never read before. It was the Captive Prince trilogy by C.S. Piccot. I don't know how to pronounce that. So here's the thing. I was in the like LiveJournal community when this book series was like first happening, which was like over a decade ago, I think. And for some reason, even though I knew that it was out and I knew that it was a thing that I would probably like, I just never read it. And so this has been on my radar for literally like 10 years at least. But I finally read it. And oh my god, it's chef's kiss. Pure id satisfaction. I fucking loved it. Like, tons of trigger warnings for this book series. It's a complete trash fire. It's like slavery, there's sexual consent issues, like there's a whole bunch of shit in this book series, but I really, really enjoyed it. It felt like reading fan fiction from circa like 2007 to 2012. Like that kind of era. It just had a lot of tropes that I kind of imprinted on when I was a teen, and it was really, really good for me. If this is not your kind of thing, just give it a hard avoid. But if you, like me, grew up in a dumpster fire, highly recommended. It's so good. If you don't know what this series is about, it involves, like, there are these two warring kingdoms, and a prince gets captured in battle, and he gets taken to be the, like, personal body slave of the heir to the kingdom, who, gave me Draco Malfoy vibes. I don't know that this was originally intended to be like a Harry Potter knockoff, but it gave me Draco Malfoy vibes. Anyway, his uncle is the, like, regent of the kingdom because he's not of age yet. And it's a male-male romance between these two. There are a lot of things about it that I fucking love. But there's also a lot of things about it that are probably pretty triggering. So like I said, it was exactly my kind of trash fire. No regrets. 4 and 5 stars across the board. I think I, again, gave the first book 4 stars and then the second 2 5 stars, because just lovely. So my last 2 books for my favorite of the year are standalones instead of series. So the first of these is Blackwater Sister by Zencho. I ended up reading this one kind of by surprise over the spooky season, because we were at a Barnes & Noble and my partner's mom decided that she was treating us and she would buy us our books. So I got this and a few other things. And this one is about ghosts. Essentially, the main character is a closeted lesbian Malaysian immigrant, Asian American. And so it begins when her and her parents are all moving back to Malaysia. Her father was really ill for a long time. They lost their money. They were unable to renew their visas, and et cetera, et cetera. They are moving back to Malaysia to live with their family. As they are arriving back in Malaysia, she starts to hear a voice, which she eventually realizes is the voice of her recently deceased grandmother, who was essentially a spirit medium for this minor god called Blackwater Sister. And Blackwater Sister is essentially the spirit of a murdered woman who eventually became a god. I don't remember the specifics of how, but people knew her story and there was a shrine to her, and eventually she sort of became this minor god. She's extremely pissed off still. And so the grandmother, as I said, has recently died, so she wants her granddaughter to take over as spirit medium for Blackwater Sister. Said granddaughter, not super pleased with this. But it explores a lot of really interesting topics: intergenerational trauma, ghost stories, vengeful women. This is a really cool, really fun, spooky, heartfelt, amazing book. It's also a standalone. You should go check it out. Maybe good for spooky season if you're the kind of person that likes to save books for spooky season. Can also be read at any time. I really loved it. Okay, so my final book for my top 5 of the year, again, excuse my cat, he thinks he's dying, is Each of Us a Desert by Mark Oshiro. This one I did read, again, for spooky season, because magical realism is a fall read to me. I don't know, something about liminal spaces, figure it out. This book, I did not really know what to expect going into it. I've known Mark Oshiro for a while, and I do also own their first book. I am not wearing my glasses, so I cannot read the title from over here. Anger is a Gift. There we go, pulled that out of my brain. But, like I said, haven't read it, so this was actually my first book of theirs that I've actually read, and it is fucking fantastic. So I really, really enjoyed this book. And then I read the acknowledgments where they talk about losing their partner and how they kind of wrote their journey with their partner into this book. And I cried. And I don't cry a whole lot. So this is a sapphic romance, very magical realism, and it is based around this idea of we live now in this kind of post-apocalyptic landscape where like the sun kind of burnt everything away, possibly a climate change metaphor, possibly more literal than that. And people were left with these storytellers who are people that are able to sort of take the stories of other people, like their confessions, physically into them, and then they essentially retell that story, kind of vomit it up into the desert, and they tell it to the sun, and they worship the sun. And so the main character, Xochitl, is her town's storyteller, Cuentista. And this process of taking in stories and sort of regurgitating them, also the people forget their stories once they've told them, like the memory is like erased from their brain. It's extremely taxing on her, both physically and emotionally and spiritually, mentally, etc. It is kind of killing her. And so this kind of explosive violence happens in her town. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but as a result of it, she ends up going out into the desert, leaving her town, and starting to try to find somewhere that she can go where she won't have to be the storyteller anymore. Going along with her is a girl named Amelia, who is quite a complicated character and is the daughter of sort of the man who incited the violence in the town. So they have a very contentious relationship. It's kind of vaguely enemies to lovers, but I wouldn't really say they were enemies, but they do have this very contentious relationship in the beginning. And you sort of see them work their way towards each other over the course of this book, and see Xochitl sort of work her way towards a bigger understanding of what her world is, because she's never gone outside of her own town, a bigger understanding of what has happened to the world, and sort of what the sickness is in her own community that she feels like she needs to return to try to help and fix. This book is very moody, it's very atmospheric, it has a lot of poetry in it, both in English and in Spanish. The Each of Us a Desert line comes from this like bit of a poem that Xochitl finds in the desert, and I highly recommend that you check it out. It was beautiful. Yeah, I loved it. So that is going to be it for my top 5 books of 2021. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite books were that you read in the past year. All right, I will hopefully see y'all soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.